to unpack. I've got no idea how you want to unpack it, but I thought broadly we were both fans of it.
I'd rather get you, because you took notes, but
Yeah.
I was attending the event, so it's more mental in my head.
Okay.
So maybe if we, like, you cover a point, I give my input, and then we go back and forth.
Okay.
But it'd be good to cover what you're saying.
What I got from it was, if I shoot through, there's quite a lot here, and then you'll get a sense of the menu of things I thought they talked about. There were discussions on epistemology, which you and I were talking about before. Yeah, and what I'd like to come back to.
Sure.
And there was a feeling that Peterson was more of a pragmatist, and you guys are more into correspondence theory, and Mohammed Hijab's more into correspondence theory. And I remember when you and I spoke, you said to me, so you agree with correspondence theory, and I queried that, and then we lost that thread and didn't continue. We could come back to that at some point.
What would be good, Tony, is
Yeah.
you cover, say, epistemology, we go back and forth, whether we agree or disagree, then we go to the next topic.
Yeah, well, let me give you the others just so you know. Then there was how much the second, so the first one was epistemology. The second one was how important the objective truth of something in a religious book is relative to its mythological impact. So Peterson took Cain and Abel, and he went, yeah, it may have happened as a physical event, but what may be even more interesting, and I agree with him, is that it's a psychological archetype for the human condition. It's a perennial story of the human psyche. Yeah? So how much is it important where something objectively actually happens, whereas how relative to its mythological value and merit, yeah?
I like that.
Okay, so that's another point of contention, where I'm an extreme liberal. Yeah, I think it's all about the mythology and the story, and I don't even particularly care about the objective stuff so much. What else came up? Concurs that, right, then I got confused, I don't know what you thought, with their view of postmodernism. They seemed to come to a point where they agreed that postmodernism meant querying how you know anything in the first place. Like the question was asked, how do we know God exists? Peterson went, well, it depends what you mean by the key words like know, you, God, yeah? And he and Mohammed Hijab seemed to concur that this was sort of a postmodern trend towards deconstructing words. And here I fell apart with both of them, because to me that's healthy skepticism, not postmodernism.
Yeah, so let's discuss that, because I have some thoughts on that. Quite
Okay,
strong.
you want to hear the others as well or not? We can remember them and come back.
So how many is it? A, B?
Epistemology, the truth of objectivity versus mythology, definitions of postmodernism, the elephant in the room we don't need to go to, what the hell, consensus version of truth, that's a deep one, forget it for
Let's
now.
start. We'll see
Okay,
how it
you want to
rolls.
go? Okay.
Because we've got about 2 hours. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so where would you like to go on any of
If you
them?
could stand there. Sorry, what's your name? Christian. Good to meet you.
Christian.
Saboor.
Yeah. And the last thing
If you
was...
stand a bit closer, because, or we can get you to wear a mic.
Oh yeah, I've got the sure.
You got a mic. Sorry, hi Chris.
I haven't got a mic. It's fine. We'll be picked
Well,
up.
I can give you a, if you want.
We're good.
Are we good? Okay, I'll stand like this and we'll kind of... The last of the four things, so we've got three. The fourth thing, the thing that I personally loved, was near the end, Peterson gave a narrative view of Christianity as telling the ultimate tragedy of the human condition. And I think there he's bang on board. Yeah, he said it's the most frightening thing you can look at is told in the story of Christ. And I really loved that Mohammed Hijab seemed to respond to that and see merit in it, yeah? Because to me that cuts to the heart of why Christianity has such power and should be taken seriously. It's not deconstructing the Trinity and all this stuff. It's seeing what Peterson's revealing in that insight. And I love that Mohammed Hijab responded to that positively. So as a meeting of minds on common themes, it was all great, and I was more than happy.
And it would be nice if you start off with why you enjoyed this rather than the second one.
You mean rather than the first
second
one?
rather than the first one.
Well, I'm trying not to be negative if I don't have to be. In truth, should I be really, really truthful? I'll be really, really truthful. I actually thought that maybe the Peterson Mohammed Hijab thing was never going to happen. Part of me suspected it might be a hype, okay? And I like Mohammed Hijab, I'll say that now. Having spoken with him privately off camera, I actually think he's a very nice guy, okay? But I suspected it might have been hype, so I was really surprised when it happened, okay? To be honest, okay? When it did happen, I was really excited for it, and then I found there was no chemistry at all. I didn't think that anything particularly contentious was touched on. I thought Peterson wasn't digging in the way he normally does, he was just listening, which he's an advocate of, he says, I want to listen. And I thought it was very brave of Muhammad Hijab to do the singing and all of this stuff, but essentially that I didn't think there was much philosophical meat in it.
Sure.
This one, I think there was a lot of philosophical meat, and there was chemistry, and it was all good, and that was the difference for me.
Good.
What do you think?
Yeah, fantastic. Let's, should we begin?
I thought we had.
Oh, I thought we had. Okay, because the way
Okay, forget it.
The way we wanted to start it
Yeah.
was it may be better to categorize the points and say we're going to cover A, B, C, D. We're going to cover epistemology, correspondence theory, something about Christ.
The Christ thing, we had the
Jump in with the first
objective truth versus mythological truth, where is more value? And definitions of postmodernism that you and I seem to have.
Fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, I can hold it.
I'm going to ditch my
I
pen.
remember the deconstruction element, and then them
Can I
having a
put this
little
here?
issue over the meanings of words at the beginning.
Yeah?
I'm going to make sure it doesn't drop. I'll hold it in my hand.
I'm always one to just defer to dictionary definitions.
Really? So listen, dude, if you want to sort of steer the conversation, I've given you what's on my brain, but I'm quite tired, frazzled. I'm doing stuff today. I've got legal stuff, so I might not be as fluent.
That's all right.
So I can trust you to...
No, that's fine. That's
Sweet.
fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's start off with the first point, which was the chemistry of this one was
Yeah.
better than the last one.
Yeah.
Do you think that's due to the first one being perhaps an ice-breaking session?
Yeah.
And the second one is like, okay, they understood each other and they
Yeah.
had mutual respect.
Yeah, yeah. And again, as I've said, I like Muhammad Hijab, having spoken to him off camera. I find him a very different person off camera, potentially, to the way he may come on camera. And I thought after the first one, there may have been quite a lot of negatives about Muhammad Hijab's fed into Peterson's ear, based on other things that had happened, which you're probably aware of.
Yeah, it's right in the room.
Right. So I was really quite surprised to see Jordan Peterson re-engage, because Muhammad Hijab had one with his daughter, and that was highly fractious, yeah? So I thought a lot of stuff would have fed back, and I was...
I'm sure he saw that.
Huh?
I'm sure he saw that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he saw that. I'm sure he had a chat with his daughter. I'm sure a lot of people were saying to him, this guy's very contentious and you may have misread him. So the fact Peterson went back, I commend him for, but the fact that it then went so well and he seemed to actually have a chemistry with Muhammad Hijab and respect the fact that he is quite an, you know, he said, you're not an agreeable guy, you're a disagreeable guy, but Peterson can see some merit in that as well. Now, I'm not saying I'm always flying the flag for when anybody, including Muhammad Hijab, is disagreeable, because I'm not. But the fact that you can appreciate that has its place, I like in Peterson, so that surprised me and that was cool.
Good. So on that point, I think let's just begin off with the mindset that Jordan Peterson went into the discussion. I think the first one, he didn't know who the guy was.
Yeah.
And the second one's, here's somebody who totally comes from a different tradition, totally disagrees on some points in a very strong way, and is being honest.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the problems that people like Peterson have is they don't like someone who has an agenda, who's trying to hide what they're doing. So very clearly, Hijab was saying to him that you should accept Islam.
Yeah.
Hijab was saying to him, this is why Islam is true. Hijab was saying to him, your critique in this particular area is incoherent. And that kind of direct, blunt criticism is refreshing for most people. I think that's why they had a chemistry.
I'm not clear where he was up front saying your critique is intelligible.
No, as in when Hijab asked, do you believe in God? And he said, it depends what you mean.
We mean by the words
by the word
you and do.
Yeah.
Even do he took issue with,
which was a bit, and believe.
And believe and God. And he's totally correct, but what interested me then...
Okay, no, but let me just explain
go on.
why that was incoherent, why Hijab was rebuffing that point. Because when it comes to things like studies about STEM, about science, technology, engineering...
Yeah, sorry.
You know, he would use evidence from that against feminists. So he would say, no, women, they have the choice, but they refuse to go to these particular universities. Here's the data. Very clear evidence. But when it comes to these questions, he's being pedantic about what does this term mean, what does that term mean, but he doesn't apply that same criteria to when he's discussing things with feminists. And that is what hijab was calling a postmodern, you're going all postmodern, you see. And I like the fact that he challenged him on that.
I do, but I thought they both concurred it was a postmodern thing to do.
However, what hijab was raising is why are you doing it in this context?
Okay, I could answer that. I don't have a problem answering that at all, because I think when you're talking about feminist activity in the 21st century, you can measure it objectively. Feminists are objects in an objective world. You can get to core facts, yeah? There are facts to be dug up. When you're talking about God, God is ineffable. The same constraints do not apply. You have to question your own epistemology more, because ultimately, I would argue, your epistemology can't grasp God. God is ineffable. And it's not God is not the same as a feminist.
No.
They're on a very different plane of...
I see what you're saying, but it doesn't explain the fact that he's being asked a question about his beliefs, which are yes or no, which are quite simple. And instead, he sort of meanders off into what does this mean, what does that mean? Do you see? That's the problem. If he said, okay, what I mean by belief is X.
Yeah.
What I mean is the tripart,
Trinity.
The Aristotle sort of definition of knowledge, right? So knowledge, true justified belief. He could have said, okay, this is what I mean. According to that, yes or no, I believe in God or I don't believe in God. Instead, he just went off into definitions and then didn't address the question. I think that's...
I know why it can look that way, but this cuts to the chase.
He took a lot of flack online.
Did he? I wouldn't support that flack, sorry. Okay. I'm in a camp where I think, as I said, God is ineffable. I think epistemology and knowledge and asking yes-no questions can take you to a certain point. It's a very valuable tool, but there's a pre-intellectual a priori condition of instinct which is essentially mystical and undefinable, and I wouldn't expect to be able to nail reality down at that level. Whereas you seem to think that you can. Conservative religious people seem to think that they can literally, cognitively, almost mathematically and logically dissect the whole metaphysics, and I assume that the metaphysics is built with a mystical strata at the top, and that you can use inference and logic to carry you a certain height up there, but at the very highest echelon you're going to move on faith, which is how it should be, which is why you need faith.
So I don't disagree in some of what you're saying. What you're basically referring to is what philosophers call academic throat clearing.
Is it?
So okay. You're basically clearing the air with what the definitions actually mean.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't negate the duty that you have to address the question that you're being asked, which is very clear.
Yeah.
And the question is...
Do you want a brolly? Yeah, I have a brolly.
We probably need one. Actually, I'm good for...
I'm good.
I don't really have a problem with
that. I do have a brolly, hang on. Okay, this is frontline debating now.
When we get juicy.
This is in the trenches discussion. Get under the brolly, let's go for it. So, I honestly don't think I'm ducking the question.
I'm not saying you're ducking the question.
Okay.
I'm saying Peterson could have had that academic throat clearing.
Oh shit.
For example.
Yeah.
Do you remember that conversation we had over there?
Yeah.
What you did in that conversation, and it's online, it's very clear for anybody to see.
Yeah.
You went through your academic throat clearing, and then you were clear on what your stance is.
Yeah.
With Peterson, he didn't do the second part.
By throat clearing, do you mean define your terms?
Go beyond defining your terms. You made it clear that you believe it's pragmatically useful to believe in God, and you were very clear on that.
Actually, I'm not sure I did. Are you inferring that because I seem to be refuting correspondence theory, that therefore I must be accepting pragmatism?
No, when you said that your entire view of God is that you don't see it in black or white terms of whether God exists, but you do believe it's useful to believe in God, it's instrumentally useful.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's the sum of its potential merit. It means at minimum it has pragmatic utility. Yeah. I think it's deeper than that.
No, it is, okay. But what you did is you explained this is your belief.
Yeah.
That you believe it to be useful, and therefore people who actually believe in God are going to have, say, better lives, right? Peterson doesn't. He alludes to that, but it's almost like he hides his beliefs. He keeps his cards close to his chest. He's not clear on where he stands. So, for example, is he a Christian? If I was to ask you if he's a Christian, actually, let's ask Christian because he's supposed to be having a conversation with us.
Hi, Chris.
Would you say that Jordan Peterson is a Christian?
In the sense that I think he sees the fundamental value in the more mythological and transcendental, say, archetypal framing of a lot of those texts, the New Testament, the Old Testament, and so on. I think he sees a value there as a psychologist.
Right.
I don't know whether he believes, for example, in Jesus Christ, the person, or that a lot of the Old Testament, the stories from the Old Testament, that they're necessarily true.
Right.
I think he's probably more of a pragmatist than someone.
So he can't technically be a Christian.
No, I think you're preempting a definition of being a Christian. You're thinking that you can define the box everyone has to sit in, and if somebody goes, no, I see profound merit in this narrative outside. If you look at it from outside that particular box, you then deny them the right to assert that particular perspective and faith.
I agree, but there are limits, though.
There are limits, but
so I'm saying, look, you can't always say. You can't get 5 Christians and always get them to agree what is the definition of Christianity. What you can do is the negation, which is they don't believe in Ganesh.
Yeah, sure.
So you can do that. So with him, he's not clear in his position. And that's what I think, for example, I was watching this channel, I think Majority Reports, I think Atheist, and they were picking up on that conversation where he's being asked about God, he's not answering, and then many different people, Christians, Muslims, atheists, that's one of the main things shared from the video, that he doesn't answer the question. A lot of people are frustrated at that.
Okay, I disagree. I think he's totally answering the question. It's just he wouldn't concur with the context within which the question is framed, and this was touched on in their discussion about Cain and Abel. You remember? He gave the example of Cain and Abel. Now, you can look at the Cain and Abel story 2 ways. You can look at it from, and they're both valid. You can look at it from the point of view of, historically, did it happen as a point of objective reality? Sorry, it's slightly... Yeah? Or you can, and Peterson said you can look at it that way, but the second way to look at it is it's describing the eternal conflict in the human psyche, yeah? That it's psychologically an eternal verity. It's archetypally true. So if you accept it's got those 2 properties, the archetypal truth of the human condition and the historical objective fact, and then you triage them and go, which do we think is of more spiritual merit in terms of helping me to live my life, yeah? In terms of us addressing the human condition. I think the eternal archetypal aspect of it is more potent and more relevant. So, in other words, if the historical truth turned out to be the case but the archetypal story had no merit, it wouldn't be of much interest. However, if the archetypal story has merit, just because the historical truth doesn't, it doesn't downgrade the merit of the story. So he is focusing totally on the impact of the narrative at an archetypal, Jungian kind of level. And the story he gave of the Christ story, his perspective on Christ as being the ultimate horror story of the human condition, I think cuts to the heart of what a lot of Christians may be unconsciously sensing, even if they're not articulating it that way. The fragility of the human condition, and that you have to confront the worst, yeah? And Christianity does a rather uniquely good job of that. I'm not saying to the exclusion of any other religions, they all touch on this, but Christianity, with the symbol of the cross and the crucifixion, as he pointed out, really does push that in your face and go stare at the horror of your condition. And I think God's agreeing with me on this point.
I think in like a formal orthodox view in Christianity, the view that so many religious Christians and Muslims take, obviously I'd say that Christians don't believe him to be
you might as well come in. If you're gonna, otherwise you're the back of the head.
Yeah, got you.
Okay.
So I can see where there are going to be differing opinions about Peterson's orthodoxy. He's really, this is not the Catholic. But I think it's true. I think there are so many adumbrations and levels and a richness there, the archetypal kind of framework that people can all relate to. I think that's where his Christology...
Couldn't we... I mean, if we were to stretch it that far, the way that you explained it, and you're saying that he's fine in doing that, then we could also say that Harry Potter is another archetype.
Yeah.
And that is a true story.
Yeah.
But the problem there is...
No, hang on. We wouldn't say it was a true story.
The dynamics
true from a pragmatic point of view. It's happening now.
Okay, so if you're using truth as opposed to factual, then
I'm using his definition.
Yes.
So what's happening in that school, I mean, I haven't read Harry Potter, I haven't seen the films either, but whatever the name of that school is, I've heard the name of the school. That is happening right now in Speaker's Corner.
Yeah.
You know, between Harry and whatever the other witches or whatever they are. You can tell I haven't read the book. That's happening right now between me and Tony, between me and Christian.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yeah, sure.
And the problem there is that it's stretched so far, you can't actually identify as anything.
You can't, if you're asking the question, what is objectively and historically true, you've got to identify what is your key question. I'm always saying this. Your answer can only be as good as your question. What is your key question? The key question I'm always asking is, how should I live? Okay? That's my first question. Okay? Now, if that's not your first question, we're inevitably going to end up coming up with different answers.
What if I was to say, how do I know what's true?
Well, I would say that if I ask the question, very good. If I would say that if I ask the question, how should I live? Almost instantly it invites the next question, how do I know what's true? Okay? But the question, how do I live, is the motive behind asking that next question.
But it can also be the other way around.
It could be. So great. So in the hierarchy of which of those questions is primary, I think how do I live is more primary, because I think how do I live is an eternal question that every human being who's ever been born or whoever will be born will have to face, and which is precisely why the religions in all cultures have generated answers to that core question. And one of the next questions it then invites inevitably is, what the hell's going on? Yeah?
However, the issue there is if you start off with your question, pragmatism is the paradigm. My question would be correspondence theory. That would be your paradigm.
I'm not anti-correspondence theory at all. Quite
I'm
the
not
opposite.
saying you are. I'm saying there'll be two different paradigms from which you start if the questions are in that order.
I'm saying that I think you've got to separate your inevitabilities from your options, from your contingencies, yeah? And I think asking the question, how do I live, is an inevitable question for all human beings for all time. You ask it unconsciously. It doesn't have to be articulated.
Same with how do I know what's true?
This is your... Okay, on that one you're right, but that very quickly we do start moving into questions of physics and metaphysics that you don't inevitably have to engage with in order to answer the question, how do I live, yeah? It's an advantage to, no question, but it's not absolutely inevitable. If you're a wise person, you will, but you don't have to. But you are compelled to make choices. I have no choice but to make choices, so I've got to ask primarily, on what basis do I make choices? You're right, then you try and work out, where am I, what are the rules, what's going on? You seem to be framing your stuff within trying to nail down objective reality. And it's a statement of faith almost. If you really think that you...
Don't you think all worldviews start off from some level of faith?
Yeah, I think this is the point. We know from, as we said before, Gödel's incompleteness theory, Hume's fallacy of induction, quantum physics, they all show that there are limits to epistemologically what you can grasp. You shouldn't conclude from that the epistemology has no merit, or it isn't the most powerful tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It's just not a universal tool. So once you understand that, you realize, as Peterson does, that there'll come a point when when that tool is no longer available to you at the higher echelons of your experience, you're going to have to go with faith. You're going to have to go with intuition. And then you can pragmatically look back and see how it went, which is why he says, I'll look for the shining example in other people, yeah? You're going to have to make a leap of faith, act it out. I'll look at you and see if your leap of faith worked. And if it does, then you may have been heading in the right direction. So at some level
sorry, carry on.
No, carry on. Well, at some level you've ground down in pragmatism because there's nowhere honest left to go but that.
The last part I don't agree with, because you would still, for Jordan Peterson to decide by I look at the followers, he still has to have a criteria to decide these followers are flourishing, these are not. And that criteria has nothing to do with the question that he's trying to answer.
Okay, we're in an eternal loop here. Again, he has to have faith.
So that's fine. So we agree there.
Yeah, I think all we've got to do is structure our arguments where we agree, whether you're an atheist or not, your argument will include statements of faith. Now the objective...
values.
Values.
Down to what did I exist? It's very shortly into the 2nd century. Did Christ exist? Did this person even exist in human form? Lots of the earliest Christian fathers were having that argument with other Christians, other Gnostics. What's cool about this though is it looks like Sane's Gospels, and reading
Sane's Gospels.
Sane's Gospels, and reading into Scripture, Old Testament Scripture, was where a lot of these guys got their idea from Christ from. Like the Isaiah 53, the suffering hero story. It's called. I think what's important is that you take, say, if you're listening to the parables Christ teaches, and you listen to many of the ways he's saying powerful moral stuff. It's just as important today as it was back then. And the parables, again, they appear to be kind of timeless. They never really, you don't need to change them. We're making movies, we do Hollywood films today, which are based in large part on kind of Christian, on those stories. If you take the patriarchs as well, the Lion King and so on. Star Wars is a good example of stories that are actually based on the kernel of...
Anakin is happening right now.
It gets esoteric and strange, right? But those stories encapsulate stuff and truths that are going to be eternal. I think that's what Peterson is trying to get.
Yeah, I think Peterson understands that, and we had this discussion before, I think truth can exist in fiction. And if you're willing to accept that truth, you disagree on that.
Now remember, I believe in correspondence theory.
So I believe in correspondence theory.
No, but I believe correspondence theory in terms of your beliefs, your values. It's not like, for example, you would use correspondence theory if you want to know what's the best way of bulking up your muscles, right? So you'd look at scientific studies about protein synthesis and all this stuff. But when it comes to religion, you would use a pragmatic view.
No. We're misunderstanding each other fundamentally, okay? I think in the hierarchy, pragmatism is below correspondence theory, okay? I know that sounds strange. I think pragmatism is below it. However, because I think correspondence theory is based on epistemology, it means there's limits to how far it can take you. Okay, that's one caveat. The other caveat is, and it's a small print caveat, I was going to put the self-consistency principle above correspondence theory, because I think correspondence theory only looks for self-consistency in the present moment empirically. That's really what it aims for. Whereas the self-consistency principle, you can project it into the future. In other words, it's even more powerful than correspondence theory. I'm actually bigging up correspondence theory. So as a practical example,
Wouldn't you say that they're linked?
I think
because being consistent is part of
they're both linked in Plato's principle of self.
Do you mind if I get Faisal?
Yeah. Come in. Come in.
You see, he has a lot of very interesting things to say, but he just
I know. We've chatted before, and he's really interesting. Okay.
Just come listen.
I think we're all anchored in Plato's principle of self-consistency. Yeah, that when there's a contradiction between any two situations in a system, then there's a problem, and the problem is either one of perception or the system itself. Yeah. So we agree with that. Therefore, the principle of correspondence theory makes perfect sense, and I agree with correspondence theory. I just think you're undervaluing its power, and that the principle of undervaluing its power, because my understanding of correspondence theory is that it's about saying, if in the here and now everything is self-consistent, I can trust that. I think you can go further and predict into the future, and that's beyond correspondence theory. That's self-consistency. You're just going, I have so much faith in self-consistency, I just don't think it's going to play out in the present. I'm confident it'll play out in the future. So on the periodic table, they predicted what elements would appear in the future because they were so confident of self-consistency in the universe. Now, that didn't tally with self-consistency for them in the moment, but because they put real jackboots on the self-consistency principle, they went, well, hedge our bets in the future that this element will appear here, this element will appear here. Ditto with the Higgs boson. And this still happens. So I have huge faith in correspondence theory, but it still has cognitive limitations.
But they all do. Correspondence, coherence, semantic, they all do.
Excellent. And when... Sorry, go on. No.
Because we laboured this point, should we move on to the other points?
Sure. Which ones?
So you had epistemology, and after that you had something else. There's quite a few points you raised in there, and I thought it'd be good to go
Hang on a sec. We had the epistemology. We had...
Because in many ways we had a similar conversation before.
It's rained all over. It's rained all over the notes. It's okay. Well, we were covering them. We had the Cain and Abel, the objective reality versus mythological reality, which we were talking about. We had the epistemology, which hopefully we've understood.
Okay, what about the third one?
The third one was the use of postmodernism. Because they both seem, when at some point in the discussion, Peterson said, what does the phrase, do you believe in God mean, yeah? And then he started deconstructing, it depends what you mean by you, what you mean by God, etc., yeah? And they both seem to concur that that was a postmodern thing to do. And there I departed from both of them, because to me that's just healthy skepticism.
You were telling me last week about postmodern book you were reading.
I think it makes perfect sense, right? Because from my understanding, postmodern is all about deconstructing.
So it makes perfect sense what they were both saying, that is postmodern.
What I thought Mohammed Jawad was saying, because John Peterson was, I have this Carl Jungian methodological understanding of Christianity, right? They're saying it's metaphorically true, right? But he goes, the church fathers never said it was metaphorically true. It was literally true. Like Muslims nowadays hold literally true to the logos that we have. So then he's saying by you doing this Carl Jung mixture of Christianity, you're kind of being a postmodernist. Right. But postmodernists, that's what they do, right? They take these legitimate narratives and then delegitimize them, talk about how atheist biases and this and that. It's just all about deconstruction. I think postmodern in itself is incoherent, and I think it's ingenuine philosophy, but I think the tools he uses are very amazing.
So just before that, do you agree with him that what they were saying was not postmodernism? He thinks that's skepticism.
I disagree with that. I think that was right. That was postmodernism.
Okay, you think it is postmodern?
How would you define postmodernism, and how would he?
I'm realizing I'm not clear how to define it. I go back to Plato's cave. I assume in Plato's cave, Plato is saying, and then I'll go through Descartes and I think therefore I am. So with Plato's cave, it's established you cannot trust your own senses. You cannot trust your own cognition. You're a self-deceiving animal, and that's the framework within which you're going to have to operate. The solution to that is the tool to use to counter that is skepticism, yeah? I don't see why postmodernism is doing anything new. It's bigging itself up as some kind of new thing. But actually, we know we have to question what we mean by the words. It's a very healthy thing to do.
Type skepticism, though. You're talking about Socratic skepticism, right? The West is very big on. But postmodernists, like started 96 or something. First was post-structuralists, where they talk about history, where they took history apart. They talk about history, it's all about narratives. Victor writes history, and all stories have these four kind of modes. It's either tragic, or it's this, or it's that. They kind of utilize narratives. And the postmodernists came after the post-structuralists, Michael Foucault. They took it even further, right? So delegitimizing these modern notions like of the prison system, of mental health, and and so they're both different forms of skepticism, right?
That's what they do, but how cogent
But
is
the point is that when John Peterson says, when you say, do you believe in God? He goes, what do you mean by do? Because do is a very, like, I don't know, philosophical, metaphysical statement, right? Like, the theological statement, almost, right?
Believe.
Yeah, then you, who's the you, the I, the concept, philosophy again, believe, God. That is very postmodernist, in my opinion. Like, it's deconstructing the sentence and talk about how, he's almost saying the question's not even legitimate, isn't it?
What's your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, when I listen to postmodernist thinkers, I read a lot on postmodernism going back. I think there's a point where postmodernism kind of split from, say, Nietzsche, was reasonable, Wittgenstein as well, who had some interesting things to say about language and linguistics and so on. When by the time you get to Foucault and the Frankfurt School and stuff, it just goes a bit nuts. And I think it was more I hear what you're saying.
I'm not endorsing
a political kind of political series of ideas that actually started to, and I think intentionally were there to try and take down the American system, the Western system.
We're actually in agreement, because I'm not legitimizing postmodernism. Like I said, I think it's incoherent and in general philosophy, right? Because it brings about some of the conceptual problems. But postmodern is still a reality. Like here in America right now, they're doing around critical race theory, they're doing of gender theory, right? Trying to blur the line between man and woman, right? It's all postmodernist, post-structuralist, patriarchy, oppressed narrative, right?
In terms of philosophy.
Because postmodern, a lot of it is the oppressor and oppressed kind of narrative.
So this is what Hijab was basically saying to him, that when you're being criticizing postmodernism, you're using it yourself when you cannot answer a question about your theology.
Okay, I disagree. I totally disagree.
I disagree with you, Tony.
Why?
I think it's true. Like,
So you disagree with him?
He disagrees with
I think it is easy just to use common parlance to get to where you want to be, I think it.
Do you want to define your terms? Can we define our terms quickly? What I mean by postmodernism, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe we're using the term differently, yeah? Because you're describing to me in societal terms how postmodernists manifest. I don't care so much about that. I care about defining a core term. To me, a postmodernist is someone who thinks human beings are a blank slate.
Can you remind me again, what was the thing that he
It was
retort from
within the
Peterson.
context
I
of...
remember hearing it, I just can't remember.
It's the eternal battle of trying to pin down the objective truth of statements. So when you ask statements like, do you believe God exists? That predicates on an assumption that God can be stuck into an objective, logical box. And those of us who believe that God is... When you pray in Islam, you say there is always something higher. I think you say this.
God is the highest.
Yeah, well, there is something above. So I assume that God is beyond, ineffable and beyond my understanding.
Transcendent,
Transcendent, yeah? And that therefore I don't expect to be able to fit God and various other concepts into a box.
There's a slight nuance here.
Yeah.
So we're not supposed to reflect about God because we cannot grasp God's essence.
Okay.
But we're supposed to reflect upon the creation of God because we can. So we can ontologically affirm that there is a God, there is a creator, there's one worthy of worship. But the actual essence is beyond us.
Yeah.
So when someone is asked...
So this is why I believe when Hijab asked that question, it should have been an easy enough answer. I didn't see that kind of...
That's exactly
Really
my point.
weird. How come you guys are all so comfortable thinking that you can nail down...
It's easy enough, especially for someone like Peterson, who is an intellectual.
What definition of God is he supposed to be agreeing or
just
disagreeing
before
with?
that, I want to know, are you an atheist or a Christian?
I'm religious.
You're religious. So it seems to be like maybe religious people want an answer and...
I believe in a deity. I'm a deist.
Oh, you're a deist.
So
You're blocking your own camera, just so you know.
I believe in God, absolutely. I do believe there's creation. There's a consciousness behind creation. I am interested very much in esoteric religion and philosophy, and in Christianity, the way it's manifested in Christianity.
Like the Gnostics.
Yeah, kind of.
Tony, sorry, just to answer your question, yeah?
That's Tony, that's Christian.
Yeah.
Christian, yeah? Nice to meet you. So, once again, I think Hijab was right here as postmodernist because post-structuralists and postmodernists have the same notion that reality has no intrinsic nature. That's the notion of the work, the principle they go to philosophy of, right? And then they start talking about everyone has these legitimized narratives to bring forth their narrative.
So you're saying that
as a will to power.
You're saying that's your definition. I'm looking for a definition.
Post-structures and postmodernists, both of them. I think what postmodernists is like second phase of post-structures, but what defines postmodernists, Michael Foucault and this, is that they are interrogating modern paradigms.
Yeah.
That's what they do. That's why they're kind of different, because postmodernists, all about modern, and it's like the systematic interrogation of these legitimizing narratives and so on and so forth. So when Jordan Peterson is saying, what do you mean by do? What do you mean by you? What do you mean by believe? Jordan Peterson's almost saying this statement is illegitimate and let's interrogate it, right? Which is very postmodernist thing to do nowadays. So I think it is postmodern.
You could say it's on the brink of logical positivism. Because remember the logical positivists, they had this idea that if something's not mathematical or mathematically you can show it or empirically, then it's almost meaningless. He's not doing that, but he's close to that by almost saying like, well, we can't really get down to the nitty-gritty.
Wow.
Like, what he said is when we get down to, I don't remember his exact words, but believe and one other word he mentioned, he said, if we think we can define them, we can't. Something like this, he said.
Yeah, and I believe, language has a